Hey everyone, I'm JC, product designer and developer, and here we are today with another episode around MCP and MCP apps. And today I have Toby with me who's gonna talk about something really exciting that has come up recently for MCP. So that is Cloudflare's code mode. Toby, do you wanna do a quick intro and what we're gonna discuss today?
Sure. Yeah, hi, I'm Toby, CEO of Endpoint Design. Obviously, always interested in seeing what's the latest developments in MCP and MCP apps. The thing I want to talk about today was, I think it was end of last week, Cloudflare announced its code mode for its own APIs. The code mode is something that Cloudflare introduced a while back, which was trying to reduce the whole context stuffing that happens. With the LLMs, you often have a limited amount of context that you can use. And you have to be really mindful. And actually, if you have too much in the context, it can start to degrade the performance of it. So, what code mode was trying to do was rather than giving LLMs all the instructions for every tool that you have, it would just you'd actually build in code what you needed it to do. So it was idea, and it massively reduced the amount of context you needed to actually do that and really leverage the power of what the LLMs can do. Let me bring you up to life and we'll talk through it. That's probably the best way rather than me just talking about it. So this is the article. It obviously gives you a rough introduction to what code mode was and what we talked about last time, and about you get this big reduction in context and token usage by going in code mode. What they've done is Cloudflare have actually enabled their own MCP server using code mode. What it does effectively, rather than listing all of the instructions for every tool inside the context, it simply offers two endpoints, one to search and one to execute. So what you do is you basically say, I want to do this particular thing in Cloudflare, like I want to update your DNS, and then it would then search through the APIs that are available, find the one that's relevant or the number that are relevant to you, what you might want to do, return that back. The other makes a call on which one it needs to do. It has the instructions for calling that subset, and then it just calls the execute to execute them. So it reduces down a huge long list of APIs or tools to just the two search and execute, which is a massive saving in context. You can see here. It's a really smart way of combining both the power of MCP, which lets people be flexible without having to generate code all the time, but also while still reducing the amount of context load or token load that you'd have to do these things. So yeah, you got the search and execute as two endpoints. Sorry, JC, do you want to say
Yep.
something?
So I have a question here. So I understand that the way traditional MCPs are built is you feed or you hand every single tool, right? So what we're saying here is that with this solution, you basically give one single uh, tool or these two endpoints, so the LLM can decide where what to search, what tool to search and execute.
Yeah, that's basically it. I mean, it's a simple idea, but it's a really powerful one. But it means it has a lot of flexibility. Something like Cloudflare, which has 1,000 endpoints or something. I think they mentioned they have a lot of functionality and offering. So their choices historically was, do we just try and make a few endpoints which are really flexible and complicated, still having a lot of instructions, or do we have lots of different MCP servers where somebody has to, subscribe to them all to be able to use that functionality? Whereas what this does, it kind of moves that sort of searching out sort of further into the MCP, and so you only have to bring up the actual context that's relevant. So much of what LLMs work with, because you've got this limited context, you've got to be really smart about how you leverage that. I think when we were in the talk in Paris, a couple of people talked about this issue with the MCP. I think the guys from OpenAI talked about how they were using code with themselves internally, and the guy from GitHub talked about how they reduced their 110 tools down to 40 to try and reduce that context load. Because it is a real problem. I think as LLMs get more and more advanced and the context gets bigger and this is less of a problem, it will probably reduce. But even now, to go beyond the standard, I think 200K tokens for Claude, there has a bigger context, but it costs you a lot more money to use that bigger context. So you really want to in terms of cost and speed and performance, you want to minimize the amount of stuff you put in. And the other thing that people don't realize is that once the tool is in the context, it stays there for every sends the entire context. So it becomes a sort of compounding problem. So keeping this really tight is a really smart way of operating. And it kind of, as I say, brings the best worlds of MCP, that flexibility, but also the power of reduced context with code mode. And then there's a bunch of stuff about uh, the other things that Cloudflare offers. But it's a great approach. And what's really nice, actually, so here they talk about their MCP server. It's actually 2,500 endpoints that they have to deal with. So, and that counts 1,000 tokens, which is a huge win for people.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool. And then just so I think I was going to mention, they actually offer this as a library as well. I think they talk at the bottom. They let you, so you can use their MCP, which uses for Cloudflare is available, and as part of their SDK, AI SDK, I think somewhere. Somewhere in here about how they offer it in their they are their library as well, so you can access it. You can see it in their MCP repository.
Okay, and
It's pretty cool.
this is very, very cool, very interesting. And as you're saying, like we heard people struggling with this and trying to find solutions, right? So I think this is it seems like the best solution so far. And do you think it will probably become the standard way to handle?
I mean, one of the challenges with all this stuff is there's so many different ways of doing the same thing, right? You have this huge amount of flexibility because the LLMs handle all the ambiguity. You can get them to do work to get the outcome can be achieved in lots of different ways. I think this is a really good approach. It's really hard to tell if this is going to become a standard right now. I think, to be honest, I think MCP is becoming a standard. We have a lot of people picking it up and using it as a way of, both Anthropic and OpenAI, and I think Google and a bunch of areas as well are using it as a standard. So I think MCP is going to be around and it will evolve. I think the way that it's been built with all this long, massive context has been a problem historically. And I think, this sort of solutions like this are ways of improving the use of MCP to make it more, to lessen the impact of the problems it has. So I think MCP is going to serve as a standard. This approach seems like a really good one. I could see more people doing with this. But there are other ways of reducing that context load. But what was interesting for me is, code mode came out and a lot of people were saying you should just use code mode rather than MCP. Code mode hasn't really got traction, but MCP has. So it feels like combining the two, or the benefits of both, is a good way forward. And I think I feel like this is going to be something that's going to hang around for a long time. Whether it becomes a standard is really hard to tell, but certainly it's a really good combination.
Right. It sounds something very useful. And on that usefulness, I do have a question. So you mentioned it reduces the context massively, right? Like you could go from 2,500 endpoints to just having this bit of code that executes the right thing at the right time. But then is the main benefit, is it cost or is it speed in execution? What do you think is the main benefit of using it?
It's a combination of everything. I mean, effectively, you can see here it talks about, if you just spec, it's 2 million tokens, and then there's different ways of, but it really brings down you've got to, whenever you have a large context, you've got to basically put that context into the LLM for it to process it and get something out. So it's definitely going to be, by reducing the token cost, you also increase the speed before it has to do something. But it also gives you a bit more flexibility as well, because you can add more APIs to this without changing the token cost as well. So it scales really nicely. So there's a lot of advantages to doing something like this. And also there is another thing that people don't always realize. I think I mentioned this earlier. If you have a context that's too full, it can degrade the performance of LLM because it's got too many things to think about at the same time.
Hmm.
If you keep your context relatively tight and focused on a particular thing, if you're putting a bunch of stuff in, say, for example, I wanted to make an API call to handle DNS. So all I care about is DNS. I don't need to know about all these other APIs they have, right? It's
Sure.
irrelevant. And actually, that can confuse the LLM because it's got this extra context of relevant things. So it may not perform as well. So if you've got a context full of stuff that's not relevant, it can actually degrade the sort of responses you get. New LLMs might get much better at handling this, but it does have an impact. So, the more focus you can keep your context really focused, the better from speed, for cost, performance, everything gets better. So this is why it's such an important thing to focus on.
Yeah, interesting. I think what I suspect this would be very, very important is for bigger products, bigger companies. So when they are at a point, so now that we're seeing bigger companies implementing MCPs and also creating MCP apps, they are going to be wanting to look into this, right? Like into polishing up in terms of the performance, also the cost. So those are things that might be more relevant to bigger realities rather than solo developers or smaller
Yeah, I
products.
think that's probably right. The big companies like Cloudflare have got these like thousands of API endpoints. So them producing an MCP, companies want to unlock the power of these LLMs um, for their services. And historically, they've all been surfaced through APIs, right? So Cloudflare's got thousands of them. So for them to use MCP to do that and to allow agents to be able to call either the agents can build the code exactly what they need, or they can use the MCP service. This lets them do that, the MCP, and still have that full access. So if you've got a lot of APIs, this is a really good way of unlocking that with MCP. So there's companies that have got a lot of functionality out there that they want to get into the hands of agents easily. This sort of approach can really make that happen without causing a big sort of token cost to their users.
Thank you, Toby, for sharing this information. I think it will be very important to anyone watching. See you on the next one.
Thanks, JC. Talk to you soon.